You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 5th of March 2025 on Monocle Radio.
Has Europe actually at last got the message about rearming? Is there any point in maintaining decorum in an era of political coarseness? And who would you pay $5 million to have dinner with? I'm Andrew Muller. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Muller. My guests Andrew Tuck and Julie Norman will discuss the day's big stories, and we'll hear from the author Peter Sparding about his extremely timely new book analysing the post-World War II relationship between the United States and Germany. Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Muller, and I am joined today by Monocle's Editor-in-Chief, Andrew Tuck, and by Julie Norman, Associate Professor in Politics and International Relations at UCL, and co-director of the UCL Centre on US Politics. Hello to you both.
Hello.
Andrew, first of all, yesterday the editor, today the Editor-in-Chief. I told Josh my column is nearly finished.
Okay.
You don't have to keep coming and appearing on the programme.
I'm just making sure you're actually here. It's not some kind of bot, actually, that's replaced you, that's got your voice down to a T.
But welcome back to the Daily. It has been an age since you were last a panellist here on.
I know. I don't know what I did wrong last time, but anyway, I seem to have managed to persuade them to let me back on the show.
Yes, but you have some upcoming travel. You are going next week to MIPIM for presumably purposes of The Urbanist.
Urbanist plus. So myself, Carlotta, and David Stevens, who produced the Urbanist with me, we're all heading there, plus some of our commercial team as well. So there's 5 of us going. We've built a radio station pop-up studio that's going to be actually in the Palais, and we'll be welcoming the great and good to come on and talk about their projects around the world. And we like it because it's a snapshot of what people are thinking about their cities and their countries and what their ambitions are. And because it's based in Europe, you get quite a few people come from the Middle East and from the stands and around, and North Africa. Not so many Americans, and most of those people are following a pretty similar script. That they're trying to be a bit more sustainable. They're trying to revive downtown cores if they're in Europe, or if they're coming from the Gulf or from even places like Oman. They come with much greater ambition and freedom to do what they want.
And Julie, anguished gear-grinding pivot on the theme of Mediterranean coastlines. You have finished, submitted, completed your book on Gaza, and there is more coming?
Yes. So I have been writing a book on Gaza for the last year. It's called Gaza, the Dream and the Nightmare. It'll be out this summer. Just got the revised version back to the publisher and just waiting proofs and final bits now. And in the meantime, I'm starting a stage adaptation of the book. I did a lot of original interviews with Gazans as well as with Israelis, and have just tons of quotes that I'm trying to rework into a stage performance kind of piece. So that's my creative project of the moment.
And we do have a little link here, because obviously the interesting thing is that Donald Trump's ambitions for a real estate generated renewal of Gaza, which even the plans that we're seeing coming from the Arab nations meeting this week in Cairo, they also see it as being regenerated through real estate. And actually, many of the players, I think, who you'll find in MIPIM, especially those from the Gulf states, are the people that are being courted for this.
Well, that was a less agonising segue than I suspected it was, it turns out. Well done, everybody. But we will start with Europe and the rearming of it. After 2 Russian invasions of Ukraine and uncountable Russian assassinations, sabotages, disinformation campaigns and other shenanigans elsewhere on the continent, coupled with 2 elections of a US president uninterested in America's historic role underpinning Europe's defence, the message would appear at last to have been received. Even generally indolent Germany has roused itself. It's likely incoming government has loosened the country's debt brake to enable a swift tooling up of the Bundeswehr. Andrew, first of all, we have been promised this sort of change of mindset more times now than I can count. Does this appear to be actually it?
It does, and we're seeing real commitments and spending. From Keir Starmer here in the UK, promising that spending will rise here on defence, and the Germans kind of breaking their fiscal rules to allow this spending to happen. Borrowing costs are going to be high for both nations, and I think across Europe there is a re-energizing of the desire to make sure you have a spend that matches what Donald Trump has been asking for. And interesting, I was just reading a story that's coming up in the next issue, which I'm not sure if it's even from your fine pen, which is about Greece, for example, which is going to surpass that 3% figure. And actually that there are many other nations, Poland and the like, who have already been far more ambitious about meeting those targets. So yes, I do think it's genuine. And I think most people think it's a kind of good thing. We cannot sit around when you have someone like Donald Trump, who seems very uninterested in having allies, trying to rely on him in any of these situations.
Julie, listeners to yesterday's Daily will have heard former Lithuanian Foreign Minister Gabrielius Landsbergis saying that whether it turns out to be the case in the long term or not, Europe has to act as if the United States is at best indifferent, at worst actively hostile. Is that the reality we are now contemplating?
Well, absolutely. And, this obviously didn't come out of nowhere. Many European states, and especially those Eastern European states, I think we're preparing for this already during the Biden administration. Even then we weren't sure, was Biden the intermezzo or was Trump the fluke? And now, of course, we know we're in an age of Trump world, at least for the next 4 years and possibly for longer with that way of doing politics. So as you said, that combined with the threat from Russia, with the headlines this week of the U.S. withdrawal, that has just made those Eastern European states double down, but has finally, I think, kind of cracked the hesitancy among many of the Western European states to finally start talking seriously about increasing that defense spending, which, of course, has many costs domestically, and I think will be unpopular because it means you're making trade-offs, and not everyone will be supportive of that. But it's been something that I think policymakers have been aware of for some time, that this is probably going to be coming.
Well, on the subject of the trade-offs, Andrew, I mean, anything involving defence, especially at this scale, does cost the most fantastic amounts of money, all of which is going to have to come from somewhere. In the United Kingdom, we have seen Sir Keir Starmer say that the money will come from cutting foreign aid, which is a pretty cheap shot because he knows that no one's ever going to complain about that. But is there a concern there that as countries stock up on their hard power, they might forget to take care of the soft power?
Soft power and people back home as well. I think that the soft power is certainly interesting. I think my feeling is that as the US pulls out of this space with the collapse of US aid, and with many European countries falling back, it'll be interesting to who steps into the void. And again, we've been talking about being in the United Arab Emirates and being in Saudi. Actually, both of those places are beginning to spend a bit more, not on some of the old aid projects that you'd have seen from Western countries, but they are beginning to fill the gap, whether that's on education, women's rights. They're doing some interesting projects. So I think that there are pockets of wealth which would like to see more influence in the world that will pick up some of these schemes, not everything. But for somewhere like the UAE, Qatar, the Gulf states, when they look to Africa, they have genuine friendships there and genuine connections. And I think there you will see a flow of capital. We were in Dubai 2 weeks ago for the World Government Summit, and it was amazing to see how many African leaders were there, not just as kind of outside guests, but because they have deep and connected relationships there. And you see, Dubai ports, for example, its investment in the Horn of Africa, millions and millions of dollars. So I think both in aid and in investment in these places, that some of these countries will step in and find the influence that America and the UK are willing to give up.
Julie, President Emmanuel Macron of France is speaking to his nation later tonight, I believe. Do you get the sense yet that European governments, certainly the ones in Western Europe, have quite figured out how to explain to their electorates what is about to happen?
I think it's going to be a struggle. I mean, for France, Macron has already, tilted in this direction in the past. So I don't think this will be, a huge surprise that this is, coming up again, but probably not with the intensity and specificity that we'll see it laid out now. But as we've talked about, certainly a big change for Germany, probably a big change for Southern European states if the pressure and push comes on Italy and Spain. So countries that haven't really had to grapple with this, and again, really trying to think about, okay, what are the trade-offs? It's you either have to raise taxes, which people don't want, cut some kind of domestic spending, which people don't want, or, increase your own debt and deficit, which people don't want. So there's going to be some negative side of it. And, there's many very vocal wings on the right and the left who just don't want to see this money going into defense and don't see that as the priority.
Well, in the United States, meanwhile, US President Donald Trump last night addressed a joint sitting of Congress. Though Trump had built it up as an epochal, transformative, most resonant address since the Gettysburg one, etc., it was by his recent standards relatively sober, give or take a reiteration of his threat to invade Greenland and a sensationally petty drive-by potshot at Lesotho, which he said nobody has ever heard of. We have. The King was on the foreign desk once. True stories. Protests by attending Democratic members were slight, verging on the downright twee, apart from that of Al Green, the Texas congressman, not the soul singer, who was asked to leave after repeatedly heckling. Julie, was Congressman Green within his rights?
Yeah, it's interesting watching the fallout from this. I mean, I think with protesting, there's kind of two camps. The one that's kind of, we're trying to persuade, we're trying to appeal to more the malleable middle. I think this is more the Obama, they go low, we go high kind of approach. And then there's more the mobilization, disruption, show your base that you're doing something, try and actually, have a voice in some of these more state occasions. And I think that's what Green was doing. So it'll certainly appeal to some. I think others even you could see in the party that was present, some people very amused, I think, and supportive, but other people looked a little bit uncomfortable, even among other Democrats. So again, I think this kind of activism, a lot of people will like it. A lot of people will think maybe that wasn't the right place.
I mean, it is all, Andrew, rather more decorous than the scenes we saw in the Serbian parliament this week, where smoke bombs were pelted at MPs by various of their opponents, resulting in actual injuries. Other Democrats last night contented themselves with sort of holding up what looked like ping-pong paddles with whimsical slogans written on them. I mean, does that actually help? Does that make any difference at all? Would it have been better if they just hadn't turned up?
I think they should have turned up, and I think they should have just been quiet at this point. I think that for the Democrats, they haven't worked out even now how to combat what's happened. And unlike in European countries where you have a shadow government, or you have the opposition party has a lineup of people who are there to take on individual ministers on the other side, that's not the US system. So you have just all these representatives, but they're not united in how they present themselves. And I think we have to wait for a few months to see who comes to the fore in the leadership of the Democrats. And it feels like this is the beginning of something that may never end, whether for good or bad, depending on what your politics are. But let's face it, in 2 years, there are the midterms, and it is quite likely in 2 years things will change. So that's why they're moving so fast. And I think over the coming months, we will see genuine opposition come to the fore. It does worry me that, that not just yesterday, but in general, there is so little voicing of opposition to any of these things. I think people are scared. I think they're going to be crushed if they come forward with any criticism. And we saw yesterday, that Republicans who had been supportive of Ukraine are now silent. They don't know what to articulate because they feel they'll be destroyed by their base if they say anything.
Well, Senator Lindsey Graham most obviously pulling a 180-degree skid at sufficient speed to give himself whiplash. But it strikes me that there's an inbuilt problem, I have long thought, with the whole United States setup, if I may say so, Julie, which was the idea, and I understand the historical reasons for it, to vest the head of state and the head of government in the same person. Under a Westminster system, as obtains here in the UK or in Australia where I'm from, you can kind of call the Prime Minister what you like. it's understood that they're there to get slapped around a bit because the actual head of state, the embodiment of the country, is in Australia the king via the Governor General. Here it's just the king. Whereas even Trump's most vociferous opponents still get caught up in this whole kind of we must respect the office thing.
Yeah, and it's kind of ironic when you do look in history because at least my understanding of reading of my American history is that, the founders really saw Congress as the hub and the heart of the decision-making, the power, and the executive literally as the executor of those decisions. And
the three theoretically co-equal branches.
Exactly, right. And then obviously the courts is kind of a check on both. And over time and through politics, the president has certainly, through norms as well as through legislation, become more powerful. And Trump is certainly pushing and perhaps exceeding the bounds of that now. And what we have seen is just a complete abdication of Congress in that regard to be that check, to be that balance, or to really even maintain the power that they constitutionally have. I mean, I'm more concerned about certain Republicans, being okay with Trump even, superseding, budgetary decisions that are made by Congress and saying, okay, we're going to use this loophole in a certain law to not even give Congress the power of the purse anymore. So there's a lot of questions right now in the U.S. regarding what branch has what power, how that's going to be sorted out, and if the courts will indeed play a checking role that they will ultimately need to play, I think, on this administration.
But Andrew, is there a case for maintaining decorum when dealing with a figure as willfully coarse as Donald Trump and many of those around him? Does it, you keep the moral high ground fine, but does that actually butter any parsnips?
I just don't see how you win in that situation when you start shouting back at Donald Trump. We saw what happened to Mr. Zelensky when he tried to even engage in raising his voice slightly. The guy has lost today the security intel from the US. You will be punished by Donald Trump if you speak out of turn. So I think it's in a way is less confronting him. I think, as you're saying, it's confronting the policies through the courts. It's putting in some checks and balances, trying to trip up some of the processes if you don't like them. That is the only way. I don't think you have to be polite all the time. It's good to shout and holler and make your views heard. And I think that some good old-fashioned protests at this time are also good. I thought it was quite a good trick to go up to the mountains to where J.D. Vance and his family were going to be skiing and hold up signs saying, "Go ski in Russia, you traitor." Because that's quite amusing, and it's on his home turf and it makes him uncomfortable. Whereas, if you're in the Oval Office and you try and confront him on those things, you see what happens. You get slapped down.
But it is a problem that the Democrats have, Julie, which they've now had for nearly a decade, is that Donald Trump is one of those politicians, and there have been others. One might think of Silvio Berlusconi or Charlie Haughey or Boris Johnson, who do understand that actual genuine shamelessness is kind of a superpower. If somebody just simply does not care when they are told that they are flouting conventions and norms, sense of propriety, even breaking the law, how do you land anything on them?
Well, you're exactly right that I think the Democrats no one has been able to crack that. And the more that Democrats often get animated, get what, the right would describe as shrill in their responses, the more that's kind of used against them. So they're kind of caught in this, do you not react, not take the bait, or do you stand up and have that used against you? I will say one thing I heard yesterday is that the laughing at Trump was something that people found more effective than either the heckling or little signs or something like that. And that had happened to Trump in his first term, too, I think in a UN speech. And that seems to rankle him in a different kind of way. But again, even that, I don't think that really necessarily gets you very far. But just say there's different types of, I think, dissatisfaction that Democrats are trying to show, but it is, I think, difficult in a situation like the State of the Union when you're playing a formal role in a formal place during a formal kind of speech to have anything that's really that effective at countering. It's going to be more these systemic moves.
Yeah, and I know, Andrew, you've been looking at the popularity of Trump, and his numbers haven't dipped really. They're kind of, it's even split as when he got elected, and I think we have to for all of our concerns about what we're seeing and consternation as Europeans, I met two Americans who I slightly know, but like people I like, and they both voted for Trump, and I met them 10 days ago. Not crazy people, actually. And when I asked, why did you vote for them? They were like, look, we think there should be a just and migration system that is well controlled. We don't think that happened under Biden. We live in the state of California where it seems to be legal now for you to shoplift up to $500 worth of goods from a store. The police will not come and arrest you. We live in a state where there is an endemic poverty to the degree that there's thousands of people living in downtown LA. And they blame all Biden for many of these things, whether rightfully or wrongly, and they want to see change. Now, and whatever you think of Donald Trump, the numbers coming across the Mexican border are down. And so for his constituents, when they see this performative shouting and hollering, they don't mind, because they think that some of it is just him, and they're judging him on these practical things. So whether all these things can be argued, but for his constituents, there's nothing going wrong.
Well, to India now, specifically New Delhi, which appears to have abandoned any plans to somehow repurpose one of the world's biggest garbage dumps as any kind of tourist attraction. A new city government has promised to deal with the infamous Balswa tip, some 4 million tonnes of trash in a heap consuming around 20 hectares and 60 metres tall at its peaks. And that is after several years of work to reduce it. The promise is that by the end of this year, Balswa will no longer be visible from a distance, at which point the city will set about other colossal landfills at Ghazipur and Okhla. Andrew, this is a pretty fundamental urbanism story, and obviously dealing with the trash generated by New Delhi is a considerable challenge. But is there any way to perceive a 60-metre tall garbage heap as anything other than an indictment of that city's authorities?
Well, I have one kind of reflection on this. Back in the 80s, I went to visit a friend who lived for a year in Manila in the Philippines, mm-hmm. and they had a rubbish dump the same scale. It was called Smoky Mountain, mm-hmm. because it was constantly burning. And he was working there, doing some aid work, but he was staying in a place. There was a house built on top of the compacted refuse, and I spent a couple of weeks with him there, and there was a church and there were schools and there were 5,000 families living on the oldest compacted part of the dump, and the kids would go out during the day and sift the rubbish and come back. This is exactly the situation you have in India. So in the 90s, the authorities in the Philippines took the decision to get rid of it, and it has been dismantled and taken away. I looked at the pictures today of what you see in Delhi, and the issue is that this is a society that is moving fast and growing fast, and it doesn't want to ban plastics, and it doesn't feel it's at that point. But the generation of rubbish continues. Even if they take this away, are they going to burn it? What's going to happen? And I think also you just looked at the pictures, and it's an indictment also on the levels of child poverty in India. Even now, the pictures of kids sifting through rubbish and families trying to find some subsistence in other people's garbage is shocking. So you take away the sight of it, but I don't know that you take away all of the problems at the same time.
Well, just to follow that up, Andrew, you make the fair point that there are people living both on this thing and from this thing. They live there because they have nowhere else to go, and they do make some kind of living salvaging recyclable stuff from it. But is this something in your experience that city governments tend to skate over a bit, because dealing with an enormous rubbish tip and the people who live around it is much less glamorous than putting up gleaming new skyscrapers or other, gleaming new stuff?
Although there is a tipping point, and I think that's what you're seeing in cities like Delhi, Mumbai, where actually you have a big enough middle class, you have enough wealthy people who, even if it's only for kind of like aesthetics reasons, they don't want to see that anymore. They want to feel that they're in a world that's just like the other cities they travel to when they go around the globe. So I think that there becomes home pressure to do something about it. And certainly the elections brought in a local administration who said they will do something to get rid of this. But the problems of poverty in many countries, and including in India, are more intractable than kind of bulldozing this thing away. It's great. Get rid of it. It's toxic. It's putting fumes in the air. It often burns, but that isn't the end of the story.
Just finally on this one, I did want to briefly ask you both in turn to play urban planner. Julie, is there a particular eyesore anywhere in the world, London or elsewhere, that you would get rid of if you could?
Well, I used to live in Belfast before I came to London, and I would say maybe the worst eyesore than trash is like politicized trash. And during bonfire season, like that's pretty much happens in Belfast, just these like piles of stuff all over, and people throw everything, their sofas, whatever, and often, kind of, very politicized kinds of things. And then they all get burned in July. But I would say that was always there was always an eyesore in Belfast to see just these mountains of things going up that were going to be burned for a political statement later on.
I feel like I should say, Andrew, as a Sydney-sider, I have to give my vote to the Cahill Expressway, which is it's the bit of highway that goes over the top of Circular Quay from the Harbour Bridge. Everybody's hated it ever since it was put up because it blocks off the city from the harbour. I don't know how difficult, expensive or logistically challenging it would be to remove it. I'm just having ideas. That's for other people to deal with, but that's what I'd get rid of.
I thought, Andrew, you were going to choose every kind of scooter park across this city. I'm amazing.
That goes without saying. Obviously, what would you pick?
Look, we live in an amazing city in London, and I don't think there are too many eyesores. I'm going to be cautious and say, because I don't want to take down the Westway, because even some of the things that look ugly to outsiders, actually, I rather like the Westway these days, and I like some of its ambition from the 60s and 70s when it was a soaring way to come into the city. So I'm not for dismantling these things. So I'm going to be brave and say, actually, that I don't think London is that full of eyesores.
Okay, controversial. To a light, whimsical take now on absolutely uproarious corruption. It has been reported that in between golfing and sneering at Lesotho, seriously, episode 455 of the Foreign Desk, look it up, King Letsia III is right there. US President Donald Trump is available to dine with the deep-pocketed at Mar-a-Lago. $5 million gets you a one-on-one dinner with Trump. $1 million a seat at a larger table. Unclear whether this includes wine or tips. Reporting in Wired magazine, which is seriously doing splendid work right now, quotes a source as saying the money is going towards Trump's presidential library, and who could possibly doubt that? Julie, what we're trying to establish here is how much any of us would pay, first of all, to have dinner with President Donald Trump. Would you stump up $5 million, even $1 million?
I mean, could we pay to not have dinner with him? Question. I mean, I really would not want to go to that. I mean, that especially when I think it sounds like he's just going to kind of make an appearance and give a chat. It's not like you're even like sitting at a table with him and talking. It's because I wouldn't mind actually like a conversation at some point, but these just like come give us money and his presence may float among you is not where I'd be putting my money.
See, if he's listening, I would pay for the pizza. I would be intrigued to have a conversation with the President of the United States.
I'd bring the Big Macs and have a sit down with Trump. But these big gala things, not really my scene.
Well, anyway, my offer is open. Andrew, would you run to even $1 million for dinner with the president?
No, but how about in reverse? I think it was maybe it was €6,000, which somebody bid to have dinner with me and Tyler.
Good Lord, really?
Yeah, and we had actually it was lunch. It was lunch. It turned into a lunch in Zurich. She drove up from Munich.
So €6,000 in Zurich. That was a sandwich.
Yeah, just an open sandwich at that. And so yeah, it was done at in Paris at the Quality of Life conference. And Rob Bound, our colleague who runs the Culture Show, he was doing the bidding around the room. And yes, so we didn't quite get $5 million, but we did get like €6,000. That's pretty not bad.
It's a start.
Yeah, it's a start. Or it's a starter, as you say in Zurich.
Did you and Tyler actually deign to engage the bidder in conversation, or as Julie suggested, you just sort of make an appearance?
No. We went for a very, very nice lunch at Kronerhalle in Zurich. She brought a friend, and we had a nice bottle of wine, and it was very enjoyable, actually. And still in touch with them now.
Okay, well, that's clearly worked out well for everybody. But is there anybody you would pay, we're going to ask, to have dinner with, Andrew? And what would be your upper limit?
I'm not being much fun here. I just think there's something really awful about some of these big charity things where you're asked to, some poor person who's like normally female, normally super cute, is like put up to be auctioned. There's something really uncomfortable about these celebrity things, and you know that they're just going to absolutely hate it. Absolutely hate it. So I think it's better that you know we're lucky in our lives, the people we get to meet through journalism things. So it's been better, I think. On a few occasions I've been at dinners where not because they know me, small dinners where people have come along. So I've been dinner in New York where Susan Sarandon joined for dessert, which was fun, and she came and sat next to me. I had a very nice conversation with her. Once in London I was at dinner and Twiggy came to dinner. That was pretty good. And another dinner where Paris Hilton came to dinner, which was also interesting. How about that?
You do move in elevated circles, Andrew.
I know. How about that?
I mean, I did. Again, this was in the line of journalistic inquiry, Julian, and Andrew's quite right. We do have an unfair advantage. I did once have brunch with Merle Haggard, and I did pay, but technically I was also on expenses. Is there anybody, though, Julie, that you would pay an amount of your own money to dine with?
I mean, I am like notoriously cheap, but I would pay to have a meal with Bruce Springsteen. He is just like my everything. I love him. I love his stories. I love his music. I love his like poetry. I just feel like I would pay to have lunch, dinner, breakfast with Bruce, like a snack, anything.
I think he'd be nice as well, wouldn't he? Yeah, I'm sure.
I think
he
must be.
Yeah,
Bruce. Of course.
Again, if he's listening, we can put you in touch. Do you have an upper limit on what you would pay for this experience?
I mean, the nice thing with Bruce is I think he'd be okay with something low key. So like I'm gonna say like a little bit lowball, but like I'd pay if there's gonna be like more music and stuff like that. Then I'll go up.
And I'm a barter. And you can go to a diner as well. You don't have
exactly.
To,
that's what I'm saying. Yeah, greasy spoon all over it.
That's fair. Julie Norman and Andrew Tuck, thank you both for joining us. Finally, on today's show, it has been quite the few weeks or so for transatlantic alliances. Certainly the first time since World War II at which one would have heard an incoming German chancellor shrug that it is clear that the US government does not care much about the fate of Europe. That is a quote from Friedrich Merz. A book chronicling the post-World War II relationship between the US and Germany is therefore timely, though the author, Peter Sparding, is probably pretty thankful that he attached a question mark to the title, No Better Friend. I spoke to Peter earlier and began by asking about the origins of the post-1945 relationship and whether Germany had no choice but to accept America's outstretched hand.
Well, yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, the country was destroyed, so there was little choice. It was not like after World War I, where the country was not occupied. After World War II, there was no German administrative state left. It was entirely dependent on what the Allies would do, and that the Americans were, on the Western side, the leading force. And pretty quickly, it became clear also that the Americans were the ones who could offer protection against the more dire threat as perceived by most Germans coming from the East, the Soviet Union at that point. Even in the last weeks of the war, you would see these civilian treks, but also military personnel trying to flee to the West to surrender to American or British forces instead of the Soviet. So it was pretty clear from the beginning which side one would prefer to be on. And the Americans stepped up quite early with the Marshall Plan and then the airlift together with the British forces, of course. And so that was just, there was no choice. And then it was a great offer, so to speak.
Yeah, the Marshall Plan and the airlift are obviously important gestures of outreach by the United States. But again, at that early stage, maybe more among Germany's people than Germany's government of the time, was there genuine affection for America and Americans, whether it was for American music, American movies, American culture? Did Germans of the period like America?
Yeah, obviously that's always a little difficult to know in the aggregate because we don't have detailed survey data. So we have some, and those are usually showing that there was affinity. And if you look through history, even before World War II, obviously overshadowed then by the wars, but there has been a close cultural and in some cases familial connection between the two countries. That's one part of my book that, despite the question mark in the title, I do sometimes think we forget how close that relationship was before the war. So there's long been a connection, and then even in the 1920s and 30s, jazz and movies and so on from Hollywood came over and were very popular. This has been a constant feature in the relationship that broad sections of the people like American culture and will watch films and listen to the music or eat McDonald's when given the chance, even while maybe at more elite levels, there's some disdain for American culture. So yes, there's definitely some affinity, especially after the war among young people. The fashion trends and so on were quickly adapted, while there was still some reservation more among older generations, of course.
I mean, has the relationship in the decades you're writing about, though, been steady and or constant? I'm wondering about the degree to which it depends on whether a given president and a given chancellor get on or not. Obviously, in that respect, Barack Obama and Angela Merkel seems to have been kind of a peak. There seems to have been a genuine regard for each other and a genuine regard for each other's countries. But has that always been the case?
Yeah, certainly. That's a good question. And one case I'm kind of making, and it's not very unique, but the relationship was confined during the Cold War. The framework, so to speak, was quite clearly set. The hierarchy was clear. The US was the big security provider for West Germany. Although there were many conflicts, even severe ones, clashes diplomatically and especially economically, they were always contained in this. That framework was kind of set, and any West German government ultimately knew that there was a high American interest in keeping West Germany on its side. So after the end of the Cold War, though, that's one thing I'm kind of observing is there's a lot more volatility in this relationship because it was lacking this framework. And for a long time, until recently, the security guarantee didn't play that role anymore. So even on the German sides, there were many wondering what the point was of this close relationship, maybe. And so now I think it depends a bit more on who is in charge on either side, right? So we saw, as you mentioned, Barack Obama and Angela Merkel, although they stem technically from different political sides in their countries, established this very close relationship on a personal level. But as we'll probably see in the next few months, depending on who takes over in Germany, we'll probably be in for a bit of a different time in the coming years.
Incredibly, it is only just now, for the first time since the 1990s, I think, that Germany is just going to reach the 2% threshold of GDP spending on defence that NATO prefers its members to cough up. Has that always been a thing? Have the Americans always slightly muttered about the fact that they wish Germany would step up? Or I guess conversely, is there an amount of nervousness about the idea of Germany becoming a major military power again?
One thing I found while looking into this question of who's taking on what and how much of the burden is shared by which side has been around actually even during the Cold War. If, as I mentioned, more contained in a certain framework, the American side at that point already pointed out that it costs a lot of money and there's some negative effects of having so many troop stations in West Germany. So they constantly asked the German side to, in this case, contribute more financially or maybe then later on with military contributions. And so that's always been a given. But I would say in the last 15 years, it's become a huge issue in the bilateral relationship, although more at the government to government level. So a lot of people in Germany may not have heard about this. As you pointed out, this has only become a major point in the public discussion in recent years, and to a large degree because of Donald Trump making it one. But the kind of request from Washington is much older, at least Barack Obama's time. But even before then, it was George W. Bush who started talking at a NATO summit in Riga, I believe, about the fact that overall, back then it was more diplomatic language, the allies weren't contributing enough. And it's always pretty clear which big countries are not contributing enough. So at first it was more polite and maybe at the government level, but now it's out in the open. And now everybody knows this in Germany. But now Donald Trump is talking about 3%. So we might be in for a different demand at this point.
Just in closing, there are a lot of ironies addressed in this book, but possibly the key irony is addressed near the start, which is that the crusade that destroyed Nazi Germany was led by a German-American general, Dwight Eisenhower, who was later a German-American president. The United States this year has sworn in another president of German descent. Does that fact of Donald Trump's background make any difference to anything? Does he appear to have any regard at all for the land of his fathers?
Not really. It's been a bit surprising, I think, to many Germans during his first term. They certainly tried all kinds of angles to engage him and try to play that angle, but it seems quite the opposite, that there is some sort of issue that Donald Trump keeps coming back to with Germany. Like I said, he's not the first US president to have issues, not only on the defense spending, also on issues of trade and trade imbalances, but he's very much focused on Germany, partially because I think it's a big country and, so it stands out in this regard. It's also, as I write in the book, it's the country that kind of learned the lesson of the end of history, maybe the most, right? And started this true belief in multilateral organizations and the liberal international order, all things that are not necessarily on top of mind for Donald Trump. So the country also in its current form maybe doesn't lend itself to his worldview.
That was Peter Sparding speaking to me earlier. His book, No Better Friend, ? The United States and Germany since 1945 is available now, and now is a good time to read it. That is all for this edition of the Monocle Daily. Thanks to our panellists today, Andrew Tuck and Julie Norman. Today's show was produced by Chris Chermak and researched by Francesca Julks. Our sound engineer was Lily Austin. I'm Andrew Muller here in London. The Daily is back at the same time tomorrow. Thanks for listening.